Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
This episode of the World Wanderers podcast is brought to you by the supporters of the show on Patreon. Patreon allows us to continue to produce high-quality episodes and allows you, the listener, to support the show in a meaningful way. Beyond the good karma achieved by supporting the show, you'll also get some cool stuff in exchange. We recently released a new ebook on self-esteem and travel. As a Patreon supporter, you get a copy of every new ebook we release, plus a host of other things. Go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers to find out more. Hola, ¿cómo están? Bienvenidos.
Bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? We're not actually going to talk in Spanish, are we?
No, I was also talking to the audience as well.
I'm just not discriminating against our Spanish audience.
I was actually appropriating from our Spanish audience.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
That's what you were doing?
Microaggression. So today we have a question from audience member
Freya Herschel. So thank you to Freya for reaching out to us via our Facebook page on one of the posts that we posted of a delicious Indian vegetarian meal from Singapore.
Yeah, and Freya was like, yo, when is there going to be an episode on vegetarian/gluten-free travel?
I don't think she said it exactly like that.
Well, she didn't say yo.
Yeah, but something along those lines. And it kind of sparked something within us where we were like, okay, yeah, let's talk about this.
What was it? What did it spark?
Well, so I am a gluten-free vegetarian traveler, so it only makes sense that I would address that question in an episode.
Yeah, and if any of you guys have questions that you'd like to hear addressed in future episodes, fire them our way, and most likely they will be addressed in future episodes.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're appropriate and respectful and
yeah, don't ask for my PIN number.
Yeah, things that we can answer. We're not experts on everything, but we will always do our best to help you out in any way that we can.
So I guess the first thing to do is identify our food preferences.
My preference is a gluten-free vegetarian diet. What is yours?
So I'm like, I'd eat like maybe a low gluten, reasonably low meat diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I definitely eat meat, probably less than like the average Canadian dude.
Yeah, I think the fact that like I don't cook with meat means that like we don't usually eat meat when we cook together.
Yeah.
And obviously like, so we made some green curry at our apartment in Kuala Lumpur, and you just cooked chicken for yourself separately.
It is weird how saying like I eat less meat than the average man kind of feels like I'm emasculated.
But then if you turn it,
I'm still a man.
If you turn it into like a sexual context, that it's like actually.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like more emasculating.
I've got a beard now though, so
it kind of balances it out.
Gets me the points.
I don't know. A vegetarian, like being a male vegetarian, is like kind of hipster and trendy.
Yeah, but not manly, maybe.
But yeah, so I'm a firm...
Not to offend anyone.
No. I am a firm gluten-free eater, and I am a soft vegetarian. So I eat fish from time to time.
Yeah, you're kind of like nutritionally, but not ethically vegetarian.
Yeah, and I've gone through some like... I mean, I've always been really grossed out by the idea of beef. Like, I remember when my mom used to make me eat parts of steak, I was just like, it's like bleeding on my plate. This is so gross. Like I might as well just like bite into the side of a cow. Like I just thought it was like really not a pleasant experience for me. So I think that there's a part of me that's like, I guess maybe connects with the fact that it's like a dead animal that I'm eating, which I think is a lot of vegetarians and where sort of the ethical side of it comes from. We drove by like a slaughterhouse in Texas, though.
It wasn't, it wasn't a slaughterhouse, but it was like a feedlot.
Well,
so like a
really
conventional
gross.
Farming feedlot where it's like a...
There was a factory beside
it.
it.
Cow mosh pit.
It was really gross. It smelled gross. I felt like sad for the animals. So anyways, it's mostly like health for me though. And I do stand by the fact that if I was like in a situation where I really needed to eat meat, I would eat meat. So that's where I stand in terms of my eating. And I think that something that I've experienced, because I've been gluten-free for 6 years. So before I ever really backpacked long-term, and like I said, I was never really like a big beef eater. I haven't eaten beef or pork since 2010. And I only really ate chicken and fish occasionally at that point. So there was a lot of anxiety going into our first backpacking trip, which is, I think, a lot of people who travel as either gluten-free or vegetarian or both, or with a different sort of like food restriction or allergy or sensitivity. It's just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to eat in these countries? Like, I know for me, the idea of going to Italy and not being able to eat was like terrifying to me. Like, I was like, all they eat is pizza and pasta and bread. Like, what am I going to eat there? Like,
yeah, I think especially the language barrier was something that was kind of anxiety inducing for you as well.
Right. Like, not being able to communicate what I needed, because I've kind of gone through a couple different stages. Like, when I first became gluten-free, I was really hesitant to ask for what I needed. And that's something that I really recommend, is that you always ask for what you need at a restaurant. And so it's like, you get to the point where you're comfortable with asking, and then all of a sudden you throw yourself in a country like Spain or like Italy, where you don't speak the language unless you're Spanish or Italian, of course. or, if you're Spanish or Italian and you're coming over to Canada or the US and you don't speak English. But it's like, you go into a country where it's a foreign language, and all of a sudden it's like, it's terrifying. It's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get something to eat? And something that can be really helpful that I highly suggest, especially if you're celiac and it's like you really need your food separated, which fortunately I don't, you can look up language cards. So if you just Google like celiac disease traveling, you can find these language cards that you can print out. They come in all different languages, and basically you can show a waiter, you can show a barista, you can show somebody that this is what you have going on and this is what you need. And it's something that I don't think I printed them out, but I definitely had like written them down or something with me for the first time that we traveled, just in case I got in a situation where I was like, I don't know what on the menu has gluten in it and what doesn't, because I can't read it, or because it's not clear, or for whatever reason. And I think you could do the exact same thing with meat. At that point in time, going to Spain and not speaking Spanish, I literally searched out the word pollo, which means chicken in Spanish. And I would like skim the menu until I saw something with pollo. And I was like, okay, I'll get that chicken dish.
Yeah. And then you looked up wheat, which is harina de trigo, if you say it with an English accent.
Exactly. So it's going to the grocery store. We could look up like, oh, is this a rice cracker, or is this a wheat flour cracker? So whatever country you're going to, looking up those words. So looking at beef, pork, chicken, fish, if those are the things you don't eat, looking up gluten-free, looking up wheat flour, and printing out cards that say like, I have a disease called celiac disease. I can't have any of my food in contact with wheat flour. Please prepare it separately, or please let me know what's on your menu that's separate, or I do not eat any meat. What is like a vegetarian option here? Having it in all the languages of the country you're going to will just ease a lot of your anxiety before going.
Yeah. And since like gluten it's not celiac disease for you, we're more like able to address the question of what to do if this is like something you do, but it's not necessarily a severe cost if you happen to have something.
Right. It's so like a couple days not feeling the greatest for me. And there's there's not like a huge side effect if I eat meat. Like, I don't feel good. It doesn't make my stomach feel good, but it's not like, it's more the fact that I really don't like to eat it.
But if you go online, there are quite a few good resources on travel for celiacs, and we'll link some of those in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah, I think the amazing thing about traveling in 2016 is that, there's all types of travel blogs out there. There's tons of different people who specialize in different things. I know the first travel blogger conference we went to, there was a girl who specializes in vegan travel. we met a girl just in Manila at the other travel bloggers conference who's the tofu traveler. She's a vegetarian traveler.
Yeah, it seems like almost anything. Hey.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's like left-handed travelers who don't eat bananas.
Yeah, I mean, people have all sorts of like quirky things and they've turned them into like online resources. So before you go, maybe taking a little bit of time to kind of find your like best or favorite, you know, vegetarian or gluten-free or both travel blogger online. That's not me, unfortunately. This is about as far as my resources go for gluten-free and vegetarian travel, outside of if anyone has like specific questions, I'm obviously available, but I don't have a blog dedicated to it.
So if you haven't traveled that much before and you have severe dietary restrictions, or like maybe not severe, but like you've got dietary restrictions, what are like the to-dos, what are like the don't-dos about traveling? How can you have a great time traveling with dietary restrictions?
So when you get to a place, I think always doing research in that city is a great way to allow yourself to have a better food experience.
Like finding restaurants beforehand, that kind of thing.
Right. So, you know, you arrive in a city and you're like, or even before you arrive, if you know you're arriving in like Singapore, for example, where we arrived, just doing a quick like Google search of like best gluten-free restaurants. And I found a link to the 10 best like gluten-free restaurants. Like there's a local Singapore man who has celiac disease and he makes like all gluten-free baked goods, for example, and looking up like best vegetarian restaurants in wherever you are. And we found like a really cool cafe in Singapore that did both like gluten-free, healthy, organic, vegetarian, vegan options, like raw desserts, like just like a fabulous cafe for somebody who likes to eat the way that I do. And it's amazing that you can find these like little places within almost any city in the world.
Yeah.
And another thing to keep in mind is that like we're pretty meat heavy culture in like North America, but not every culture is like that. Like if you dig into like eating Indian food, there's like a huge part of the population that is vegetarian. So you can almost always find great options of like vegetarian Indian food. You can find like full vegetarian restaurants for Indian food. A lot of different places.
Yeah. But they use quite a bit of dairy in Indian food, right?
They do. So if you're
vegan,
that might be a little bit tougher. Doing your research though, because sometimes like not everything has like heavy cream in it. There's a lot of like dal doesn't have cream in it. Like paneer is obviously dairy. Mm-hmm. Like butter chicken tikka masala has cream in it, but they do have a lot of options that don't have cream in it. So once again, it's just doing your research and seeing. Something that I've really loved about traveling with data is that we arrive
at you mean like cell phone data?
Cell phone data, sorry. Yeah, and having cell phones while we've been in Asia this time around is we get to a restaurant and I'd never heard the word roti before. I'd heard naan. I knew I couldn't eat naan. But I was like, oh, what's roti? Maybe it's like a corn or a rice base. And I Googled it. It's not. But, you know, that saves me from eating something that might upset my stomach. And I just know without having to like have a conversation with somebody who doesn't speak English very well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point about like the advantages of being connected, and probably more so important when you do have restrictions.
Right. So doing research will definitely make life a lot easier. I think that the one thing that I'll say about traveling with food restrictions is it does make it a lot more difficult to just like set out for like a day on the town and like, okay, yeah, I'll just like eat lunch whenever I like feel like it at whatever like food court is closest. I mean, you can have some luck, but you know, in Asia, they use like chicken broth for a lot of things. They use fish stock for like a ton of their soups, even if there isn't meat in it. They use like a fish base for a lot of stuff. So it can be beneficial to just know like, okay, there's like this vegetarian restaurant. They have like gluten-free options, which a lot of the times those two go together. It seems like if you find a vegetarian restaurant, they oftentimes do gluten-free. If you find a restaurant that's gluten-free, they also have vegetarian options, which is really awesome if you're both. So looking up where you want to go and maybe planning your day around that, making it sort of an event. And that can actually be really fun.
Yeah, and that's something that's kind of changed as we've traveled more. Like I remember the first time backpacking together 5 years ago, we would try to do like, oh, let's walk around and find somewhere to eat. And we'd be hungry and like hangry and like looking at menus. And I'm like, let's just pick somewhere. And you're struggling to find something that you can really eat and feel excited about eating. So I think like planning ahead seems to be like a really important step.
Yeah, it's been huge for me. And that's like my travel life as well as my life at home. And this is like my next thing. So being open with people and telling people that you've got these restrictions going on. And so like your friends and family might know back home, but if you're meeting new people, just like letting them know. And it's something that I've never wanted to inconvenience people, but at the same time, I don't really want to be served like spaghetti and meatballs and like sit there and not be able to eat, because it makes like whoever's cooking for you feel really awkward. And something I've learned over time is like letting people know beforehand is really helpful. And that can be the same as if you meet somebody in a hostel dorm, they're like, hey, do you want to go for dinner? You can be like, yeah, of course. Like, just so you know, I am vegetarian. Like, I would love to find somewhere that has like a vegetarian option.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's the type of thing where like it can be hard to be like assertive like that, but it makes such a big difference when you're like in the dorm room and people are like, do you want to go out and eat? And then you start walking somewhere and they're like, oh, cool pizza place. And then everyone's like, yeah, let's go. And then you're like, you can't eat pizza.
Right. And I've been in like situations where I haven't been assertive just as many times as situations where I have been assertive. And it's always more awkward when you sit down somewhere. Like I remember doing it in Cartagena in Colombia. We met like a really cool couple and we were hanging out with them and we went to this Italian restaurant. And then I was like, oh, I actually can't eat anything here. And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm gluten-free. And they were like, oh, why didn't you just say something before? And I was like, I don't know. So then it's like we awkwardly get up and leave this restaurant, which is like way more awkward than if when we're looking, I was like, hey, could we find somewhere that's like has gluten-free options? And really, if you're gluten-free, Italian is like literally the worst.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, there's like salad, but yeah.
It's tough though, like if you're in somewhere like Colombia where you really need to be careful of how they wash the vegetables, that can be like kind of an iffy alternative as well to just like eat salad.
Yeah.
So I think being open and then being assertive as well. So being assertive with the people that you're with and letting them know what you need, and also being assertive with people at the restaurant. So people don't read minds, they don't know what you need. So really letting them know. Like asking what's gluten-free, asking what's vegetarian, asking if you can get a certain thing without the meat on it.
Yeah, that's funny. It's I remember distinctly being at a restaurant in Brazil, and in Brazil it's very common. It's a common route for Israeli backpackers to take. They kind of like start in Argentina and like move up to Brazil. And we were in a restaurant and there was a table of, I think it was mostly guys, but yeah, it was Israeli guys behind us. And they were all just like, oh yeah, can I get this? But I don't want this and I want that. And just being very assertive about what they wanted, what they needed. And we both, like growing up in Canada has a much more passive culture. And obviously culture doesn't define you, but it does kind of change how you interact. But getting to the point where we're like, confident about being assertive about what we want has taken like quite a while, but it would have made such like a big difference at the start where we'd go to a restaurant and you're like unsatisfied with all the options, but a bit nervous about creating your own option, which is like something you can do at restaurants.
Oh yeah, totally. And like getting creative at restaurants can also be like, so if you look at all the mains and you're like, oh, there's like nothing that I can eat, but then you look at like the different sides or the different add-ons and you're like, oh, they have like plain rice, they have like plain veggies as like add-ons. It's like, boom, you've just made a meal. If you eat eggs, add a fried egg to that. Like, you know, you've just like created something for yourself. You're still hungry, add a side salad.
Yeah.
Like you can really like make things for yourself, or look at the way that something's set up and ask them to like change something about that meal for you. Like most restaurants are like willing to accommodate.
Yeah, like if they're good, like they may not be excited to do it because like as an employee, you're kind of just want to stick to what's normal. But, you know, some places there are people who are excited to do it. And if you're just assertive about it, most places will do it.
Right. We even had a situation the other day being in Kuala Lumpur, and they had a 3-dip with pita bread meal. But then I saw that one of the meals had corn chips with it. So it's like, okay, they obviously have corn chips here. I can eat those. I would love to eat this hummus. I just can't eat the pita bread. And we just said, hey, can we swap out the corn chips for the pita bread? She checked with the chef. He's like, yep, that's cool.
Well, no. So what actually happened was she went and checked with their manager or something. And then they were like, no. And then we're like, well, can we buy corn chips? And she's like, yeah. And we're like, can we buy hummus? And she's like, yeah. And then we're like, okay, can we do that? And then she went and then came back and she was like, oh yeah, we can just swap it.
Yeah. So I think it's always worth it to ask, because like had we not asked, I would have just been like, oh, I really wish they offered like corn chips instead of pita bread. Right. And then I would have been resentful about that restaurant. So always asking for what you need, and they might not always say yes. Excuse me.
Yeah. But like, just think it's not like a personal slight, but I feel like sometimes it's been hard to be where something's like so simple and obvious, and then they come back and say no. And you're like, why not? But like not taking that personally.
Right. And sometimes it can be like a challenging thing, especially with a language barrier, when you're trying to explain what you want. Like, it sounds so simple to just be like, oh, can I have like what's that Korean dish? The bibimbap?
Oh, bibimbap.
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 Bibimbap. Bibimbap.
It's like B-I-B-I. Bibim.
Bibimbap. It's a traditional Korean meal.
Just say it one more time, please.
Bibimbap. I think I did it right that time. It comes with pork, like, so ask for it without
beef.
Beef, sorry. It comes with some form of meat. Just ask for it without that. It's like a great rice dish with a bunch of veggies. It's got an egg. I think that's like a good option, is to ask for the things you need. I think my favorite experiences in cities, though, are when I seek out restaurants that I feel excited to eat at. Yeah.
So one thing that I think has helped us have a better time when it comes to eating with the restrictions you have is just making sure that you bring some snacks along that you can definitely eat. Because I think that the times where we've had like a bad time have just been like when we're both really hungry and we're like looking at a restaurant menu and you're uncertain about it.
And you're like, I will literally eat anything.
Yeah. But like when we have like a granola bar or something, or like, you know, an apple,
fruit, dried fruit.
And so you're not like starving when you're trying to search out something that you can eat and still feel happy to eat.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest recommendations for travel in general. I have friends who like don't seem to depend as much on food as I do, but you know, eating is a non-negotiable for me. I need to eat.
For most humans,
I need to eat every day. I need to eat regularly. I get really grumpy when I go too long without food. My blood sugar drops. It's not pretty. So for me to prevent other people from having to experience that, and also for me having to experience that, because it's really not nice to feel that way, I always travel with snacks. So like apples. I don't think bananas travel very well because I don't like the spotty ones. But if you like the spotty ones, then that's a great option. Dried fruit is really good. Granola bars. In South America, plantain chips were kind of our go-to. Nuts. And even like, so for airplane or bus travel, I never count on being able to eat. That's a big thing, because if I count on them having a gluten-free snack or a vegetarian snack, I'm going to be disappointed, because they almost never do. If they do, it's a massive treat. Massive, massive treat. So I always prepare for like, okay, they're going to come around the airplane and they're going to give me pretzels. And I'm going to be like, oh, I can't eat those. And instead I can pull out my like whatever snack I've prepared for myself, and I don't feel like upset or slighted or hungry or anything like that. And it's a rule of thumb when I'm at home. I don't hike without snacks. I don't go to work without snacks. I don't do anything without snacks. My bag always has snacks in it, because you never know when your body's going to need that. And I think that's the time where it gets like really frustrating when you go to like a convenience store and you're like, why is there nothing I can eat here? And it's like, well, prepare ahead. And I think everywhere in the world that we've gone to, we've had really good luck with finding some good gluten-free alternatives in grocery stores. Whether it be like fruit or nuts or granola bars or that sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you think it like plays into like your excitement about going places, the traditional cuisine and like how capable you are of eating it?
I guess kind of. I haven't really thought about it too much. Do you mean like, do I get more excited about going to a place that has like traditional cuisine that I can eat?
Yeah. Or like when you think about like, oh, we're going on a European trip, would you be more excited, or would you maybe try to avoid like going to Italy because, you know, a lot of traditional Italian foods like that?
I do get excited when I can eat traditional food. I think Italy was really disappointing for me when I went the second time because I'd been once before. I saw a naturopath that said that I was gluten intolerant. So I knew how good the pasta and the pizza was. And I think that was a little bit like frustrating for me because I was like, oh, I love lasagna. Like, oh, I really love like ravioli, like a pumpkin ravioli or like a ricotta spinach. So good. But it's like, I wouldn't not go there because of it.
Yeah. The one thing I was kind of just thinking about was how, like it's been kind of exciting for you. It seems like as we've traveled and kind of stumbled across foods that we maybe didn't know about before that are gluten-free, like the arepa in Colombia, or like in Brazil, a lot of places make like tapioca, almost like a galette.
Yeah. And the one in Italy that we found that was
it's like a
chickpea flour.
Yeah.
We did this on our food episode. Why can't I remember the farinata. There's a chickpea flour sort of bread thing that's fried with olive oil in Cinque Terre in Italy. And that was such a fabulous treat for me because we're going along, we're hiking, we're like stopping for olives and wine, which I can have. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, chickpea flour bread. And I asked him, like, does this have wheat flour in it? He's like, nope, it's made entirely of chickpea flour. I'm like, bam, give it to me. All the chickpea flour. I ate so much of it. But it was also the same thing getting to Colombia because I don't ever go somewhere with the expectation that like, oh, they're going to have like a really great gluten-free dish that's going to be a national food, or, oh, they're going to have like a really good vegetarian dish. Other than like India, I would expect to go to India and eat some really good vegetarian food because I know that a good population there is vegetarian.
Yeah. And it's nice like being in Asia and knowing that so much stuff is rice-based. Yeah,
definitely. I know that the idea of going to like Mexico appeals to me because they eat like a ton of avocado, which is my favorite food, and
corn.
They eat a lot of corn based, like their tortillas are all corn based, which is amazing. And I didn't have too much expectation going to South America, but I was super pleased to find that the arepas were corn based. And then again, going to Brazil, and Brazil is such a meat heavy food culture. I remember going to the traditional like paella food thing, and they're like, oh, do you want to eat a chicken heart? And I was like, no, I don't want to eat a chicken heart.
Oh, how about the liver?
They're like, oh, would you like a different part of the chicken? I'm like, no, I don't want any part of the chicken. They're like, oh, do you want like the cow tongue? And I was like, no, I don't want the cow tongue. I want the salad buffet. So it was so pleasing to find a gluten-free alternative, which was tapioca, and they take it and they make like a really thin sort of like wrap with it almost, and that was really delicious. You could get sweet ones or savory ones, almost like a crepe.
Yeah.
Finding things that have like buckwheat flour instead of wheat flour is always like a nice surprise. What are some other things that have been a real treat gluten-free? Yeah, traveling in Asia in general, they always have rice. Sometimes they'll use like teriyaki sauce or soy sauce, which isn't gluten-free. Most places will have like a tamari alternative, or you could just go like no soy sauce, so just ask for like plain rice instead of the stuff that's cooked with the soy sauce.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another really good option. But I don't think that I think that I'm like well practiced in it enough that I like the idea of being able to taste local foods, but at the same time, I'm not like so attached to that I get like upset if I can't have it. Like, for example, going to the Philippines, one of their national foods is balut, which is a duck embryo. I have like zero interest in engaging with that. somebody mentioned like, oh, just don't look at the beak when you eat it. And I was like, I'm going to throw up right now if you keep talking. I do not want to eat a duck embryo that has a beak. Even you're cringing.
Yeah, no, I didn't take part in that either. So you brought up the Brazilian, I can't remember what those places are called.
I think they're Paria.
That's like the Argentinian, Uruguayan meat grill thing.
Oh, yeah.
But the Brazilian restaurant where they come around with like the big things of meat and just give you like all you can eat meat.
Yeah. It's like definitely not my place.
But so like I do eat meat and you mostly vegetarian. And that's something that's kind of taken a while to figure out, like the balance between like
Traveling
sometimes not being able to find like a perfect place that suits both of our needs, but sometimes we'll eat at a place that I really am excited about, and then sometimes we'll go find a vegetarian restaurant to eat at, and like having kind of like a trade-off there and kind of compromising.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that that's like worked for you from like a meat gluten eating standpoint?
Meat gluten?
A gluten and meat eating standpoint? Like, is there any...
I think like at first we weren't as good about communicating with it, or about like... Yeah, communicating I think is a huge part, but then also just being like, I don't know, calm and like rational.
Right.
Like I know things like when we're in the UK and like you can't really eat fish and chips, but that's like something I really want to eat there.
Yeah, you love fish and chips.
And so like maybe I wouldn't eat as much as I normally would if I was kind of on my own, but like being okay just like going to try that out, or like being persuasive about like, oh hey, can we go eat at this Brazilian meat place just so I can like have the experience, and then like find some sort of vegetarian restaurant tomorrow that we can eat at.
Right. Yeah, and I think that we found a really good balance between like even for example cooking last night, where you know you're like, I really would like some chicken. It's not like I'm like, you cannot cook chicken here. And I mean, I think that that's also like something within our relationship.
Well, so. I mean, and that's also like kind of where we stand on like the morality of eating meat question. Like if you are in a different position, and then you're obviously going to have different expectations for the people you interact with.
Yeah. And I can't speak to like other people's relationships and how they feel about, you know, traveling with a meat eater, or if you're as a vegetarian or as a vegan, or being in a relationship with one. I can only speak for my personal beliefs. And I think that whatever you want to put in your body is fine with me, as long as you respect what I want to put in my body. And I think that we've done a really good job with being like communicating what we need. So, you know, if we find a really good vegetarian restaurant in one place and I'm like, hey, I would really love to eat here, and then you come and eat there with me, then, you know, I'm fine going to a restaurant that you want to eat at. And I think we're also really good about like, so you wanted to eat at Nando's Chicken, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Like we can go there. And you were like, okay, cool. If there's nothing that you want to eat there, then, you know, I'll eat, and then we can go get you some food after. And, you know, I'm fine eating at Nando's Chicken. They had a really good salad. I was able to get like a good side with it that was not meat or gluten, and which is like actually really cool that you can do that at a restaurant that's called Nando's Chicken. But there's like lots of different options and lots of different ways to deal with that. I think that it's just going in with it being like, yep, cool, this is what you want to eat. And then you're like, yeah, okay, if there's like nothing you want to eat, we'll go get you some food after. And like just making sure that both of us are like satisfied with our like food experience.
Yeah. And just like optimizing instead of trying to find like the perfect place every single day.
Right. I think that that's actually a big thing that I've learned. I used to get really attached to like what I was going to eat. And I don't know, maybe it drove like happiness from the outside, which is like not a really good way to find happiness. But there was something about me that was like really attached to what I was eating. And travel was really good for kind of letting that go and just being like, okay, there's like times where I'm eating purely for pleasure and there's times I'm eating for sustenance. And sometimes you don't eat the best meals for sustenance. You need to eat something. You find something on the menu that's going to work for you and you eat it. And sometimes it's not like the most amazing experience of your whole life, but it's like, it's just food at the end of the day. And you know, the fact that I can find stuff that I can eat that's like fairly enjoyable is like good with me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. What do you think about like actually picking places to stay and like the importance of that when you've got dietary restrictions?
Like in terms of where you stay in a city or which like places?
Just like the types of places and like having access to cooking facilities.
Yeah, I think that that's really nice for breakfast, especially in Asia. I'm trying to remember South America. South America was a little bit better for eating out for breakfast. I am not big on like the traditional Asian style breakfast. I prefer to just eat like the things that I eat at home, like fruit or smoothies or eggs or something like that. And I think that having like some facility where I can cook my own breakfast is really handy.
But I think that it's been like something that's really made travel quite a bit easier for us. And like we've tried to stay in hostels that we know have a kitchen, or like get an Airbnb that we know has a space to cook for the most part, if we're going to stay somewhere longer. Because if you're staying in a hotel, or like if the hostel doesn't have a kitchen and they have a hostel breakfast, like you typically can't eat that. And then that causes like just more of a hassle.
Yeah, it is more of a hassle for sure. I think it's like not a make it or break it for me. It's just like a more comfortable thing. And like traveling long term, I like to be comfortable. I think that's just a reality. There's only like so long where you're like, okay, I want to be like a dirty, smelly backpacker, like sweating constantly, carrying around this massive bag. Oh yeah, and I can't eat anything. You know, it's just like kind of the cherry on top of all the other things that can be unpleasant about being a backpacker. It's nice to just like know that you can go get what you would normally eat from a market or from a grocery store and you can cook it yourself, and it's like, okay, I can go out into the world feeling energized.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was something like the first time we traveled, we were staying in hostels basically exclusively, and like relying on hostel breakfast. And I think that I remember it causing you like quite a bit of frustration when we'd go down, check out the hostel breakfast, and like maybe there's like an apple and the rest of it's like croissant, cereal, meat, cheese, oats that have gluten in them.
Yeah, and I also don't eat or I don't drink like cow's milk. So even having like cornflakes, which pretty sure it's cornflakes that are gluten-free. I don't really eat cereal because I don't have milk, but it's like even if I could eat those, it's like then there's no like dairy-free milk option. I know that when we first traveled, I did have a lot more attachment to my food, and I did feel a lot more like if I couldn't eat something, I would get a lot more like frustrated about it.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, what's wrong with this hostel for like not serving like a gluten-free alternative? And now I just don't have expectations with those sort of things. Like hostel breakfasts, I basically don't even look for that when I look at a hostel. If it says free breakfast, I'm like, cool, I'm probably not going to eat it. Like I just don't even think about it as something that I'm going to engage in. Yeah. For the most part, because it's usually like white bread with maybe some jam or some butter, maybe a bagel if it's fancy, and then like basic cereals with cow's milk. Yeah. So it's to the point where like you don't even eat those.
Yeah, basically hardly ever. Well, like we try to stay places where we can cook at least breakfast and like usually one other meal a day for ourselves.
Right. And that's also, I mean, that's the comfort of being able to eat like food from home, being able to like satisfy my food intolerances, but that's also like a budget thing as well.
Yeah. So we've kind of covered like prep beforehand. So looking at places you're going to stay, making sure that there's availability for you to cook for yourself. That's an important thing. Before you head out for your days, kind of thinking and doing a bit of research on restaurants. So like that's the research side of it. And then the kind of in the moment stuff, being open and assertive in situations, telling people that you're got dietary restrictions at the restaurant, not being afraid to ask for what you want or ask questions, don't make assumptions. Is there anything else you feel like is kind of maybe lowering expectations is another thing you touched on?
Yeah, I think lowering expectations, especially in developing countries, is a massive thing. Like, even with the fact that I don't eat or drink cow's milk, I don't even expect like Starbucks overseas to have soy milk. Like,
but they all do.
Most of them do. And it's amazing that they do. That means that I can treat myself to a latte. But if they don't, I'm not like, oh, this is like the shittiest place I've ever been to. Like, what's wrong with them? Like, it's 2016. Why don't you have soy milk? And I think it's a shift in your attitude where it's like, okay, this place doesn't have soy milk. What else do I like on the menu? And I'm a massive tea drinker, so I'm like more than happy to just have a cup of tea at any coffee shop that doesn't offer a dairy-free alternative to milk.
Mm-hmm.
I think remembering that you have made a choice. Obviously, if you're celiac.
Well, I mean, a lot of people didn't make a choice.
In terms of celiac.
I'm celiac. I don't know.
What do you mean they don't make a choice?
Like, they didn't choose to not eat bread. It's like they can't. And like maybe you didn't choose to eat a lot of things because you've got allergies. Like, a lot of people didn't make a choice. It's just kind of what they're dealing with.
Right. No, I was just going to say, I was referring to the meat eating. That's where my sentence was.
But some people don't choose that either.
It chooses that.
Well, no, you just get sick because you eat meat.
Right. But so if you've chosen to be gluten-free and it's your choice, you've chosen, you're not celiac, you're not intolerant, it doesn't make you sick, you just make a choice because you feel better. And if you've chosen to eat meat or to not eat meat for, you know, ethical or health reasons or whatever it is, remember that it is a choice that you've made. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've made that choice as well. But remembering that you did make that choice and that people are not entitled to cater to you, I think is something that has shifted in my brain to just like being happier about it. Like, I'm comfortable with my decision. I'm confident in it, but I don't go places expecting people to just cater to me.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, being gluten-free, having an intolerance, being celiac, if you have like an allergy to meat or if meat bothers your stomach, like, I definitely feel you. Meat doesn't sit very well in my stomach, especially like beef and pork. Gluten makes me super sick. So I definitely feel you. I understand that it's like a tough thing to deal with. It sucks when you look at like the amazing croissant in Paris and all you want to do is eat it. I guess I kind of think about like how I guess I could eat it, but how I'm going to feel after. So thinking like more long term instead of present moment. Like, yes, it would taste good in the present moment, but it's really going to suck when you're like on the toilet later for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, there were moments where I have tested it. There's been a couple times where it's happened accidentally, and there's been one time that I can think of in particular when we were in Paris. I really wanted to try this like really mini pastry, and I'd kind of heard that sometimes people go to Europe and they like their intolerance doesn't happen as much because we like really refine our flour in North America. And I was like, I'm just going to try it. It was pretty small. I don't even know if I ate the whole thing, but I spent the entire time in line at the Eiffel Tower, like hunched over because my stomach hurt so bad, running to and from the public washroom that had like a 15-minute wait each time. And it was in that moment that I was like, this isn't worth it. Like, yes, that pastry tasted good, but I don't have the same FOMO about stuff like that anymore, just because I know how it makes me feel later. Like, I'd just rather not eat it.
Yeah. So that's like the idea that you have to eat pizza because you're in Italy, or you have to eat pastries because you're in France, or you have to eat, I don't know, something because you're somewhere.
Yeah. And it sucks. It sucks if you deal with IBS or Crohn's disease or celiac disease or any type of digestive thing. Really sucks when you're traveling, but keeping in mind that food is only one aspect of the amazing things that you get to experience while you're abroad, and keeping your digestion healthy and feeling good in your physical body is a lot of times like worth it, so that you're able to do the things in the place that you are.
Yeah. And then so kind of like one of the final points that comes to mind for me is, where was your anxiety level at pre-travel, like the first time we went backpacking, about handling all these food restrictions where we travel, because it does seem to be like one of those things where it's like you feel that anxiety beforehand, but then all sorts of, once you go traveling, you're like, okay, this is doable. It's not a big issue, but it feels like a bigger issue before you're out and experiencing it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really even get pre-travel anxiety about food anymore because I kind of know how to deal with it. And I've had experience dealing with like all types of situations. The first time we traveled, I was like massively anxious. Like that was probably my biggest thing that I was anxious about. Like of all the things you could be worried about traveling, mine was like, am I going to be able to eat places? Like, am I going to starve to death at some point? And I mean, there's been some like unpleasant meal situations. Like I remember being on like an all-day train one time in Spain, and it was a Sunday. Everything in Spain closes on Sundays. We got let off at this like tiny little town in the middle of Spain. There was one convenience store open, and it was like literally a hole in the wall convenience store. And I got a can of olives, and that's what I had to eat. And I remember being like, this really sucks. But it's like in hindsight, I'm grateful that the olives were there and that I did have something to eat.
Yeah, and thinking that kind of like ignited our love of olives.
Yeah, I mean, I love olives now thanks to that trip. So something really great came out of that. And I remember also being in our van in Australia, and we'd like prepared a meal to cook that night, and our stove wasn't working because it was too windy. And so we ate like canned beans with piri sauce cold out of it. Like not the most pleasant eating experience. But again, something I can look back on and be like, you know, it was just like food for sustenance. It's a funny story now. And like, you're always going to find something. It just might not be like an amazing portobello mushroom burger with like a gluten-free bun and, you know, a garden salad on the side. It just might not be that. And, you know, just understanding that your food situation is going to be different abroad in some places. I think like having less attachment to the things you're eating was kind of like a big thing for me. And once I came to a place where I had less attachment to what I was eating and just getting to a point where it was like, okay, I'm on a train.
Maybe emotional attachment.
Yeah, emotional attachment for sure. And I think it's something that other people deal with. I know that it's something that I really battled for a while, as I got a lot of emotional attachment to food for whatever reason, and overcoming that has been like huge for me. It's like, okay, you know, I don't really have many options. It's not going to be a delicious 4-course gluten-free veg meal, but you know, it's going to be something that's going to fill my body and energize me for the rest of the day, and I'm going to eat better tomorrow. But I think just going out there and doing it, experiencing for yourself, if you're heading out on your first trip and you are dealing with some food intolerances or food restrictions, packing some of your favorite non-perishable snacks from home. So something that I really like to bring is like Lara bars, or Go Macro bars are really good. Just bringing a couple of those, maybe like 5 to 10. So you've got a couple of like your go-to snacks from home that you can eat as you like sort of discover the place that you're in and find like the granola bars that work for you, or the fruit that works for you, or like the nuts that work for you. Always check ingredients in different places. They've got a weird thing in Asia where they roll like almost all their nuts in wheat flour. It's really strange, but that's what they do. So shifting more to like dry fruit here instead of nuts. And just like discover new snacks that you love. I did not know I loved plantain chips before I went to South America. I'd never heard of an arepa. So, you know, be open to discovering new cool things that you can eat.
Yeah. All right.
I think that pretty much covers that entire topic. Do you have anything else to add?
Thanks to Freya for the question. And if you guys have any other topics you want to hear on the podcast, shoot us a message on Facebook, send us an email, let us know. Always looking for new topics to discuss and expertise to share. And as always, thanks a ton for listening.
Thank you.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.